Morning, colleagues. We'll be starting in the next 2 minutes. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. I think the coffee wasn't strong enough for some of you. So I say good morning, but I know that we're also joined by people online. For some of them, it's the afternoon. For some of them, it's the evening. So colleagues, it's really great that you have joined us today. My name is Philani Mthembu. I'm heading the Institute for Global Dialogue, which is an independent foreign policy think tank associated with the University of South Africa. Essentially, what we seek to do is to advance a balanced, relevant, and policy-oriented analysis, debate, and documentation of South Africa and Africa's global politics and diplomacy. We strive to promote a broader understanding of the role of foreign policy and diplomacy in the pursuit of national and international development goals. Our work essentially focuses on foreign policy analysis, geopolitical dynamics and governance, and of course, international diplomacy. The following seminar, which is titled China's Global Civilization Initiative in a Changing Geopolitical Landscape, What Relevance for Africa and the Global South, has essentially been put together in partnership with the China-Africa Joint Research and Exchange Program and the Chinese Embassy in South Africa. And of course, the timing of the seminar is not by mistake. I mean, it's very intentional. Because in March 2023, President Xi Jinping introduced the Global Civilization Initiative, emphasizing respect for diversity of civilizations. This vision, which was echoed in 2023, eventually echoed on June 10, the day we are convening, 2025, with the first United Nations International Day for Dialogue Amongst Civilizations, essentially designed to promote understanding in an era marked by division and mistrust. With this in mind, the Institute for Global Dialogue and the Embassy of the People's Republic of China decided to host today's seminar on the Global Civilization Initiative in an effort to better understand what role it could play in a changing geopolitical landscape. that sees essentially multilateralism facing various crises. So the seminar will essentially interrogate to what extent this vision aligns with the United Nations Charter, particularly in terms of promoting sovereign equality, non-intervention, peaceful resolution of disputes, and human rights through inclusive development. But being a foreign policy think tank located in Africa and in the global south, it becomes important for us to locate this dialogue in a context of Africa's place in a changing geopolitical landscape. And also understanding to what extent the Global Civilization Initiative aligns with the aspirations and the interests of Africa and the global south, as these countries and regions seek to advance their development and the development of their citizens. Now, in 2026, this year alone, Chinese President Xi Jinping has hosted close to 20 world leaders, including the US President Donald Trump. And these meetings take place in an important moment in a changing geopolitical landscape and the future of the UN and multilateralism in general. The question for us is, can South Africa, African countries, and those of the global south harness the changes that are underway in order to advance their interests and development priorities? The Institute for Global Dialogue, following this particular seminar, will be publishing a research report on the Global Civilization Initiative, which will also incorporate key outputs drawn and stemming from today's discussion. Of course, a recording of today's discussion will also be disseminated to participants and also to the broader online community. What's also important to note, colleagues, is that today's discussion does not come, sort of out of a vacuum. Our research as an institute on China's place in the world has taken place over several years. And of course, when we looked at China, we tend to look at it in terms of its relations with Africa and the global south. And it forms part of our ongoing research on Africa's agency in international relations, especially focused on the continent's relations with strategic powers. Some of this work has included several publications, including books such as Africa-China Cooperation Towards an African Policy on China, ? It's also included working papers such as China's Belt and Road Initiative, How Can Africa Advance Its Strategic Priorities? And of course, also work such as China, Africa, and South Africa, South-South cooperation in a global era. And more recently, some of this work has included publications such as South African Perceptions of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and also reflections on the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, Africa's relations with China in a new era. Now, the structure of today's discussion, colleagues, is going to be following my welcoming remarks. We will request Ambassador Dave Malcolmson, who is the acting Deputy Director General for the Middle East and Asia at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. He will give us welcoming or opening remarks. Following that, we will have a keynote address by His Excellency Wang Yi, a member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and Foreign Minister. You notice he's not here amongst us, but there is an online speech that he has prepared, and we will play that. We will also have Ambassador Wu Peng, who is the ambassador of the People's Republic of China here in South Africa, and he will give us a keynote address. We will then break briefly for tea. That will be followed by a panel discussion. And I will hope that we run the program and stick to time, and hope to have everybody out of here at the latest by 12:30. So if I see people starting to get restless, I'll know that, I am not doing my job well. So colleagues, with that, I look forward to today's discussion, but I would like to welcome Ambassador Dave Malcolmson from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation.
Thank you very much, Program Director Dr. Mthembu, Your Excellency Ambassador Wu Peng, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be able to attend the seminar today, and I would like to thank the Embassy of the People's Republic of China and the Institute for Global Dialogue for organizing this important event. Today's world, as we all know, is undergoing profound transformations, with significant shifts taking place in the international landscape. While the global south continues to rise, many developing countries still face significant developmental challenges, including limited access to resources and unequal terms of integration into global markets. In this context, closer cooperation and coordination amongst countries of the global south remain more important than ever to promote the exchange of knowledge, innovation, and technology, as well as to strengthen human resource capacity and equip our people with the skills needed to adapt to the evolving demands of modernization and the global economy. South Africa and China enjoy a long tradition of friendship and a strong bilateral relationship characterized as an all-round, comprehensive, strategic cooperative partnership in the new era. South Africa greatly values this partnership, which continues to advance economic cooperation, development and prosperity, South-South cooperation, and a shared commitment to multilateralism. Further, South Africa considers China an important partner within the international community and is confident that China will continue to contribute constructively to the United Nations system and global governance processes, particularly in advancing development and prosperity. As China's global initiatives are implemented, Africa's development priorities must remain central. This has been emphasized in platforms where we cooperate closely, such as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation and other high-level engagements in BRICS and the G20, as well as in the Belt and Road Initiative. Distinguished delegates, South Africa believes that mutual learning among civilizations is essential for cultivating respect among nations and collectively addressing contemporary global challenges, particularly those related to socio-economic growth and development. At the same time, such engagement contributes to building a more inclusive and equitable global governance system, including through greater representation of developing countries within United Nations institutions. In an increasingly interconnected world, embracing cultural diversity and encouraging dialogue among civilizations is vital for promoting peace, cooperation, and shared progress. Through dialogue and exchange, societies can build mutual trust and lay the foundations for a more harmonious future across regions, cultures, and ideologies. In this regard, cultural exchanges play a critical role in promoting understanding and strengthening cooperation among nations. This is more important than ever in the current context of geopolitical polarization, volatility, rising fragmentation, instability, conflict, and threats to global norms, international law, and the rules-based order. South Africa welcomes China's strong stance on defending multilateralism at a time when the global rules-based international order, based on international law and with the UN at its core, is being threatened. Furthermore, we welcome China's role as a leader on the global stage and acknowledge that China's global initiatives are aimed at promoting effective multilateralism, improving global peace and security, promoting socio-economic development, and contributing to the reform of global governance. South Africa is confident that China will promote these initiatives, noting the primacy of the United Nations and the African Union, and in line with the principles of and programs of the UN and the African Union, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. The global initiatives that I've referred to include the Global Civilization Initiative that we are discussing today, as well as the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the International Organization for Mediation. In this regard, the Director General of International Relations and Cooperation, Zane Dango, and I were privileged last week during a visit to China to meet with the Xi Jinping Thought on Diplomacy Studies Center, which conducts research on these global initiatives, as well as President Xi's ideas for the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. And thank you very much, Excellency, for all the arrangements. It was a very insightful meeting that we had with the center. In conclusion, let us continue to deepen dialogue, strengthen cooperation, and build partnerships that advance shared development, mutual understanding, and lasting friendship between South Africa, China, and the broader global South. I wish you a fruitful and productive meeting today. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Malcolmson. And colleagues, now we will, to start the keynote address session, we will start by an address by His Excellency Wang Yi.
各位嘉宾、各位朋友，很高兴和世界各地的朋友们共同庆祝1年1度的文明对话国际日。文明多样性是世界的底色。3年前，习近平主席郑重提出全球文明倡议，为不同文明和合共生指明了方向。设立文明对话国际日，就是落实这一倡议的重要举措，受到国际社会的广泛的欢迎。去年，中国同联合国等国际组织在世界各地举办盛大主题活动，庆祝首个国际日。各界踊跃参与，充分反映出文明对话是民心所向、大势所趋。当前人类文明发展面临空前挑战，分裂对抗不断加剧，动荡冲突此起彼伏，国际法治遭受侵蚀，信任赤字日益加深。我们要以对话增进理解，培植互信，以交流促进团结，谋求共识。要不断夯实构建人类命运共同体的人文基础。我们要坚持相互尊重，推动不同文明和谐相处。文明没有高下贵贱之分，都是人类的宝贵财富，都应当享有平等的地位。文明的敌人从来不是彼此，而是唯我独尊、霸道与傲慢。要坚持平等、互鉴、对话、包容的文明观，超越狭隘的文明优越论、文明冲突论，致力多元文明和谐相处、相互成就，推动共建各美其美、美美与共的世界文明百花园。我们要坚持以人为本，厚植文明交流根基。人民是人类历史的创造者，也是文明对话的主体。要促进各国人民相知相亲，推动文明交流互鉴成果更广泛、更直接惠及各国人民。中国坚持高水平对外开放，持续出台免签等便利化措施，以实际行动鼓励跨文明交流。中国也愿与各国加强文明对话，深化治国理政经验交流，共同破解时代难题，携手拓宽世界的现代化道路。 我们要坚持传承创新，增强文明进步动力。人类社会创造的各种文明都闪烁着璀璨的光芒，要做好保护和传承，并且通过创新实践赋予其新的时代内涵。作为世界遗产大国，中国将努力做到本国文化遗产保护和利用，同时助力各国优秀传统文化实现创造性转化、创新性发展。人工智能、社交媒体等新技术新应用，为促进跨国界、跨语种、跨文明的对话带来新的机遇。要充分挖掘技术红利，赋能文明交流互鉴和传承创新，促进人类文明共同繁荣。我们要坚持交流互鉴，完善文明对话机制。文明的生命力在于开放与交流。我们要积极拓展文明对话全球伙伴，以共同庆祝文明对话国际日为契机，打造超越意识形态偏见的沟通平台。中方支持联合国为文明对话发挥重要作用，支持进一步用好联合国文明联盟、联合国科教文组织以及文明古国论坛的平台，愿继续向从事文明对话的联合国机构提供捐款。各位朋友，文明如水，润物无声；对话如桥，连通世界。中华5000年文明具有突出的连续性、创新性、统一性、包容性、和平性。我们愿携手以文明之光照亮前行之路，以对话互鉴凝聚奋进力量，共同开创人类更加美好的未来。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much for that. Colleagues, with that, I would like to welcome Ambassador Wu Peng from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China.
Thank you, Program Director, Your Excellency Dave Malcolmson, DDG from DIRCO, Dr. Filani Mazembe, and colleagues from Diplomatic Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I know the early morning seminar is sometimes difficult. I just want to put some notes to Foreign Minister Wang Yi, my big boss, his speech. But I have to touch upon some substantial issues concerned by many South African friends. Otherwise, nobody likes to listen to me, right? Today marks the second International Day for Dialogue Among Civilizations. In 2024, with support from all member states, the 78th United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution proposed by China together with more than 80 countries, including South Africa, to make June 10th the International Day for Dialogue and Among Civilization. As Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi just said in his video, the vitality of civilization lies in openness and exchange. I would like to thank the Institute for Global Dialogue for organizing today's seminar on the Global Civilization Initiative, where we can revisit and practice the spirit of this International Day through dialogue and exchange. This is surely one of the best ways to celebrate this occasion. In today's world, the future of all countries are closely linked, more than ever before. Look, yesterday when the Persian Gulf conflict happened again, the inflation rate everywhere jumped. So the world faced the rising unilateral or coalition, hegemonism, bloc confrontation, and neocolonialism, which threatens the progress and the development and the human society, and questions how different civilizations should coexist, or where human civilization is heading. I have to look back some philosophy things in maybe 100 years ago from European philosophy. If we took a look back at the human history of ideas, German philosophy, Karl Jaspers, once proposed the axial theory, axial age theory. It's very interesting. Maybe someone today don't know him at all, but in China, he is relatively famous because in his theory, he argued that between 800 BC to 200 BC, almost at the same time, civilizations like China, India, Greece, and Persia experienced profound intellectual breakthroughs and added great diversity to world civilization. His theory actually implies that different civilizations can coexist and exchange. At the same time, on the other hand, another German philosophy, Oswald Spengler, argued that different civilizations as incomprehensible to each other. After several decades, we could see Spengler's idea in Samuel Huntington's, the American political scientist who developed the clash of civilization theory, which is in essence pessimistic about civilization exchange. We Chinese are very open. Actually, we are communist and socialism, right? All these ideas actually from the very beginning from Europe. Actually, we want to learn and respect very much in Europe's history. In history, okay? There are so many great scientists and philosophy. Where are they today? Huh? We also want to, for example, I already worked in Africa, the continent, almost more than 10 years. I found a lot of similarity between common Chinese people, for example, and African people. For example, the family value. We shared very, very similar family value. For example, in China, if one people go to the city and become wealthy, he have to go back to his village to take care of his whole relatives. I think that happened in Africa, very, very common. So we have a lot of similarity. Actually, these two kind of schools of thought I mentioned have been at odds with each other for almost 100 years. 2 world wars broken out in this period, causing great casualties and harm to humanity. For China, we had a clear and compelling answer to this question. In 2023, our president put forward the GCI with great vision. The initiative advocates the respect for the diversity of civilization, the common value of humanity, the importance of inheritance and the innovation of civilization, and the robust international people-to-people exchange. The initiative points out that different civilizations can absolutely coexist in harmony and strengthen each other through mutual learning. At least if you really care about China, please do study some Chinese history, as we always did. We study other civilizations' history. This is a clear way forward for civilization to rise above cash. No longer ago, at the invitation of President Xi Jinping, President Donald Trump of the United States paid a state visit to China. During the visit, the two presidents agreed on a new vision of building a constructive China-US relationship on strategic stability. The key word is stability. We no need to talk about friendship. We talk about stability. The so-called constructive strategic stability means positive stability with cooperation as the mainstay, healthy stability with competition with proper limits, consistent stability with manageable differences, and lasting stability with expectable peace. We understand one-time summit cannot solve all problems. You may also know recently U.S. government listed many Chinese companies in the list of deal with some military purpose. It's very strange. Even very famous Jack Ma's e-commerce platform, Alibaba, was listed. I really don't understand and feel very funny why Alibaba related to the e-commerce one related to military products. It's very funny. As a natural member of the Global South, China advocates that all Global South countries must promote exchange among civilization. In the 2024 FOCAC Summit, President Xi Jinping and African leaders announced 2026 this year as the China-Africa Year of People-to-People Exchange, and proposed the Time Partnership Action for China-Africa Modernization. These initiatives have injected fresh momentum into the joint efforts of China and South Africa, and of course Africa, in building a multipolar world. In this regard, I would like to share my perspective through three keywords, beginning with the letter A. First, dialogue among civilization is an accelerator for development. You know, we Chinese just want to doing business. We not very care about other things. So the first A I will say is for accelerator for development. In 2025, 1,147 South African participants traveled to China to attend the Chinese government training and degree programs. A lot of other private visits, I did mention that. This was an all-time high. Many participants say that they will apply the skill to South Africa's development and modernization progress, including in new energy vehicle, modern agriculture, technology, and the digital economy. This year, thank you, is not very long, okay, almost to the end. The Chinese embassy has organized various policy briefing events on the zero tariff treatment to 53 African countries, so as to help South African. So I hope that South Africa can better seize the broad opportunity. So on behalf of the Chinese embassy in South Africa, I would like to pledge here that we are ready to provide customized service for South African exporters, company, so as to fully deliver the benefits of the zero tariff policy. At the same time, I hope South African side, especially the private sector, also will attach importance to China's market as well. If you don't promote your products, how you can use the policy for zero tariff? Talking about the tailor-made service, I promised to a South African company. I do hope. Actually, my recent experience also tell me, people just talk about value-added industrial products export to China. I understand. But I checked the customer authorities' statistic figure. For example, I astonished the fund. South Africa export isotope, the radiation, not for military use, okay? This is for medical. For medical. We import quite amount of isotope to China from South Africa. So recently there is a company, they sell the medical machine to kill for cure the cancer. So I do try to find some buyers in China for them. So please, let's work together. Zero tariff policy is not empty talk. It means something. I met a South African farmer. He already explored Chinese market 30 years ago to sell citrus in Guangzhou. Now he is the biggest South African citrus exporter to China. Even containers, the whole containers, citrus shipped it to China. During the COVID pandemic, when they met some challenge, I was a DG in Beijing. I directly give them help so that they can unload their citrus in the very challenging circumstances because the COVID pandemic. So I do hope that you can seize this opportunity. Secondly, dialogue among civilization is an anchor for security. In the face of regional hotspot issues such as tensions in Middle East, China and South Africa have consistently advocated resolving dispute through dialogue and consultation, maintaining in-depth communication within mechanisms as BRICS. We together play important and constructive role in safeguard world peace. I know it's not easy. In terms of disruptive technology, China and South Africa are advancing joint AI research networks to strengthen mutual trust and guide technology for good. This July, next month, China will host the World Artificial Intelligence Conference under the theme Global Solidarity in the AI Era. China warmly welcomes South Africa active participants so that we can better promote the inclusive development of artificial intelligence. I think the large language model should be included African language. In African language, that is where African civilization exists. If in the model, no African local language, in future, I worry about African culture, maybe lost contact with the international community. So I'm not an expert, but I think our government do want to launch this kind of cooperation. Thirdly, dialogue among civilization is an adhesive for improving global governance. As we facing rising risk of global fragmentation, China and South Africa remains committed to strengthening solidarity through multilateralism. During the G20 Johannesburg Summit, China and South Africa jointly launched the initiative on cooperation supporting modernization in Africa, with a view to supporting the implementation of Africa Union Agenda of 2063 and the African Continental Free Trade Area, and to enhance our role in global governance. Through intellectual exchange, we also together draw up blueprint. We co-host events like the 2025 China-South Africa Human Rights Seminar and Forum on Governance, gathering the Global South wisdoms to address global challenge. Dear friends, as a conclusion, I would like to quote President Nelson Mandela. He once observed that peace is the creation of an environment where all can flourish regardless of race, color, culture, tradition, or any other social markers of difference. So China is formally committed to build such a harmonious world together with South Africa and other African countries on the basis of mutual respect for each other's core interests. Let us continue to be as practitioners of the Global Civilization Initiative and inject more positive energy into a world undergoing turbulence and transformation. So I wish today's seminar a great success. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I think, what becomes very important, it again goes to the question that was posed earlier. In how South Africa, how African countries position themselves to take advantage of the changes that are underway in global politics, to take advantage of the various initiatives that have been proposed, including on trade. But as Ambassador says, it definitely will take a more proactive engagement, not just by state actors, but also by non-state actors, the private sector, members of higher education. You mentioned the various exchanges that are taking place amongst the various universities. And of course, after our short break, we will have also some of those scholars who are working on the relationship, not just between South Africa and China, but also broadly between Africa and China. And I think what you'll notice in the panel discussion that will follow the short break is that we have also, Chinese scholars based at the Chinese, various institutes within the Chinese Academy on Social Sciences, who are working very closely not only on the Civilization Initiative, but also who have done a lot of work in terms of South Africa-China relations, but also in terms of Africa-China relations. So colleagues, I think with that, I think it sets the scene, those opening remarks, but also the keynote address. It sets a good scene for the panel discussion that will essentially follow. And then colleagues, I think what we will basically do now is that our panelists have taken, their notes. What the panelists will also be doing is they will also be responding to some of the issues that were raised in the keynote address, but also the issue that the panelists will be addressing is essentially situating the Global Civilization Initiative in a changing geopolitical landscape and looking at what relevance for Africa and the global south. And so while we just set up in terms of the panel discussion, and while we ensure that our online speakers, that all the technical details are in place, what we will do is take a very short break, call it a comfort break, call it a break just to engage on some of the discussions that we've had in this opening session. But we'll just take a break just here. I would say 15 minutes should be sufficient. And then what we will do is we will reconvene back into the room and have our panelists set up for the panel discussion. So can we please give a final round of applause to our speakers in the opening session?
One, two. Mic check. 1, 2. One, two. One.
All right, colleagues, we are reconvening and about to start with the panel discussion, the second part of our program. If I could check just one more time with our colleagues, everyone fine online? Okay, so our online speakers are sorted. If I could just ask them to, when I introduce them, just to test their video if it is okay. And then what I will request is that our physical panelists, if they could come up, Ms. Sanusha Naidu, who is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Global Dialogue, if she could come up. And then if I could ask Professor Kwezi Pra from the Department of History at the University of South Africa. You can also take your seat here. And then we also have two colleagues joining us from China. That is Professor Xue Li, who is a senior fellow at the Institute of World Economics and Politics at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And then it is Professor Liu Haifang, who is a director of the Center for African Studies at Peking University. So colleagues, what we have heard is essentially a presentation also of the Global Civilization Initiative, but we want to locate it within a changing geopolitical landscape, and we want to also interrogate its relevance for Africa and the Global South. What I will request is that each of our panelists will have opening remarks. They could keep those remarks to about 10 minutes. In fact, let me not say about 10 minutes. Let me just say 10 minutes. About can be interpreted in many ways. So if I could just ask our panelists to keep their remarks 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a discussion after that. So we will start with Sanusha Naidu. Just your initial reflections on the broad, yes, those are working, on the broad theme of today's discussion, but also some reflections from the earlier session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mtembu. Good day, everyone. It's always great to be back in Pretoria, coming from the other country, which is the Western Cape. Let me also observe all diplomatic protocol. I see the ambassador has left, but I think his presence still looms large in the room. I find that with regard to this discussion around globalization and the civilization debate, I think it's very important to situate it for Africa, particularly because for Africa, we constantly pivot towards the issue of African agency. And we look at African agency in a very kind of, at times, we look at it as vertical and linear. We talk about it in the context of what voice Africa has, both as a collective, but also as nation states that can promote the kind of diversity, but also the kind of multipolarity or the global governance architecture. And for the longest time, I think the question of African agency was very much about the 5 dimensions or the 3 core dimensions of globalization. It's around the political, it's around the economic, it's around the social, and now more increasingly around the technological and the environmental issues. And so the question is as Africa is beginning to try and locate itself within the global governance architecture, it's also trying to locate itself both in terms of where is its identity in the global south. And very often I think the questions that we raise about the civilization debate is whether or not we look at it more from a political economy question, or do we look at it more from the question of identity, culture, cultural independence, and more importantly, in terms of the issue of, ethnicity and the questions around that. And I feel that this civilization initiative, it's beginning to scratch the surface of what we are thinking about. But for Africa, I think what we do is we are remiss in a sense that we actually have an absent debate about Africa's civilization and contribution to the global civilization architecture and discourse. UNESCO and other kinds of UN initiatives that celebrate cultural hegemony or celebrate cultural diversity, rather, we fail to locate Africa as an old civilizational continent, that one that had lots of different contact points, historical contact points with the global south, whether you talk about the East African trade, whether we talk about the voyages that we see under particular kinds of economic and commercial activity, or if we think about the slave trade and how that influenced the kind of dynamic of civilization. What we also don't do is we don't recognize the contributions that Africa has made to civilization. I think you, Palani, we were having a discussion, and there was a volume of books that were published by UNESCO around the kinds of military, economic, political civilizations that existed in Africa before we talk about the civilization narrative that centers in one particular historical epoch. And I think for me, that is the ownership that we tend to fail to recognize. And so we still kind of talk about Africa as if Africa is still beginning to find itself, that it's still beginning to define itself as well. And so when you look at the context of the civilization debate, and the one thing I found very interesting that cut across from the keynote addresses that were made this morning, I think was really this question of the clash of civilization versus the coexistence of civilization. And that is interesting because in 1990, when we looked at the end of a historical epoch, we looked at it in a very historical bound context, that there was a clash of civilization and there was an end of history. And we made the mistake of assuming that the end of history was the end of a historical epoch. I think we are revisiting that now with what we are seeing in terms of the deepening cleavages and the deepening conflicts that is existing right now. What's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in parts of the global south, parts of different continental issues, is actually a revisiting of civilizational disputes. And these civilizational disputes are really about the question of how do you locate that civilizations have now become part of different types of nation states. You just have to look at the African continent, and you have to look at the boundaries that have defined the civilization context in Africa. And I think it's a similar debate in the global south, whether we talk about Southeast Asia, whether we talk about East Asia, whether we talk about South Asia. Because there are these debates about where civilizational issues become granular, in a sense. So it becomes about identity. It becomes about, questions around the superiority of my culture over your culture. And I think the best example that I can use is when I look at South Asia. The debates about South Asia and the debates about what you're seeing in terms of issues around not just a civilizational question around the Indus Valley and so forth, but it's more about the question of identity that is granular around maybe North India versus South India, and how those play out in migrational patterns in this space. And I think to really bring it back home and to be able to look at it in the context of where we are talking about some of these debates, the question really is, are we actually looking at the Global Civilization Initiative in the context of the fact that there are still challenges that remain around the nation state. We've been, in the last several months, looking at various levels of confrontation. Do we really belong within the nation state? And I think those are the questions that shape not just whether or not we belong collectively in a global community, but are we also bringing that kind of tension, that paradox of what Danny Roderick calls the globalization trilemma, about the fact that the system itself is not prepared to recognize that civilizations don't have to be one civilization. Because when you start having those debates, then you are using the dynamic of one civilization to define the narrative of the entire world. And I think that in itself is where this question about, the debate around what are we trying to seek? Are we trying to seek, as Nkrumah talked about, the political kingdom first, and then all else will follow? Are we trying to seek ourselves in terms of a socio-cultural dynamic? And I could talk about Giddens and everybody else in this context of the sociological debate about identity. But I think in the last few minutes, let me close with this idea of, if we're thinking about globalization as an evolving process, the question I have for myself as a person of a diaspora, but a diaspora that's much older in South Africa than in other parts of the Indian diaspora. Do I feel a connectivity to the civilization of South Asia? I don't, to be quite honest. Because your identity has evolved. You have so many different identities. And I think the challenge we have with globalization is that because it's constantly evolving, we are looking at it as a way in which we tend to think about it as regionalization. But are we using regionalization and integration as part of our debates in terms of what regional integration is, in terms of the civilizational question? And I think we're not doing that. So we're kind of looking at it in a more kind of linear way. We're not granularizing it. But the future generation, we talk about this African boom of young people. How do they see themselves? Do they see themselves in a collective identity of where they belong? Or do they see themselves as part of a nation state? Or do they see themselves transboundary? Because that then makes you wonder where the civilizational debate is going. So I think there are these contradictions between globalization and civilization, but there's also the contradictions between civilization and the nation state. And finally, the contradiction between, or the paradox between, how do we assert civilization, but in the context of Africa, we're not sure whether we're recognizing what our historical narrative is in the civilizational context. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Sanusha, for kicking us off. Also with that thought provocation. Let me go online and ask Professor Shui Li to give us your opening
Yes, can you hear me?
remarks. Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay, very, very good. First of all, I would like to thank you, the IGD and the moderator, to invite me to this very important events. I would like to say that a few months ago, I used to visit South Africa. I traveled some cities, Cape Town and Joburg, also Pretoria. And you were like said, it's Vani, right? So my speech in 10 minutes were divided into the three parts. The first part is my understanding of the Chinese civilization. And then the second part is the relationship between global civilization initiative and the Chinese philosophy. And the third part is the implication of the GCI for the global south. For the number one, according to my understanding, we have Chinese civilization is a huge civilization. It lasts for at least 3,500 years. According to the new evidence, if I go to 5,000 years, that's a huge civilization, right? Of course, it has some very critical parts. According to my understanding, there's a two parts. The number one is the Confucianism. That's the most important one. And the number two is the Taoism. And the number three is the Buddhism, which is from India. Of course, is very serious, localized by Chinese scholars in the past around 2,000 years. But when it comes to the state government, I would say the most important part is Taoism and Confucianism. How to say that? I would say the 5 points of the Chinese philosophy. The number one, I would say, Chinese civilization or Chinese culture is a family-based civilization, which is big different with the Western civilization. It's a family-based. Family take the priority for everything. That's one. And according to this one, of course, Chinese people will say we will go to the collective or group profit, will take the priority. Just like the ambassador said, when you get rich, one Chinese get rich in the city, he will go home to build house or to help his hometown guys. Let's reflect the influence of the Chinese tradition. That's one. So based on this one, the family-based civilization, I would say Chinese culture is very important for its inclusiveness and openness, because Chinese culture is a secular culture. Secular culture normally is open to different religions, different cultures. In our long history, at least from the Qing dynasty, that's 2,000 years ago, we practice this kind of the inclusiveness and openness. And the third one, I would say, Chinese culture, we believe and practice this kind of philosophy for the international order. The relationship between different countries, they can be close, they can be not so close, they can be so a little bit far, but no enemy. I think, according to my understanding, for Chinese civilization or for the emperor in the past 2,000 years, we don't think we have enemy. Someone you are in the tributary system, okay, we can have a very close relationship. Otherwise, you can stay with yourself. We didn't say you need to be a Confucianism. You need to adopt it. That's not our philosophy. According to this one, I would like to say Chinese civilization do not have the DNA of the Messiah complex. That's the main difference between Chinese civilization and the Western civilization. And then the number 5 of the Chinese civilization philosophy is that Chinese view the human being is part of the nature. That's why in Chinese we say 道法自然, which roughly means the behavior must abide by the rule of the nature or heaven of the nature. That's the 5 pillars of the Chinese philosophy. Based on this, I would like to say that Global Civilization Initiative, that is the 4 contains. Number 1 is respect diversity of the civilization, which means states must stay at the equal states or coexist. No country or civilization can view itself as above another civilization or another countries. A crest of the civilization should not be and never been the mainstream of the relationship between the different civilizations. The number two is promote the common rules of the humanity. The number three is how to make civilization inherent as well as the innovation. That's very hard. All traditional country or or civilization with a long history also facing this kind of the challenges. And the number four is people to people exchange. That's what we are doing here. So number three, the meaning for the South Africa, I will leave this topic to the Professor Liu Haifang. She is a very distinguished scholar on the South Africa study in China, published a lot of books. I won't say that. I just want to say one thing. Just now, Ambassador say China get a lot of benefit from South Africa. He make a case for one medicine. I will say what he said, just one medicine only. According to my understanding, China import many kind of the medicine from the South Africa for cancer, for leukemia, etc. Not to speak that one company, VC company, they have an investment on the Tencent, get a huge money. Like the number three, I would say GCI implication for the global south. I would like to say the 3 points. Points number one, it offers a new option for the global south when they try to strive for the modernization, which implies modernization. There's no standard way. Every country, every civilization have to try to work on its own way to go to the modernization. I think that's the most important thing. Number two is different civilization. They have a different argue or different declarement for how to deal with the relationship between the different civilizations. For Chinese culture, now we are on the way to growing up to reach the dream of Chinese, the Chinese dream, renaissance of the Chinese civilization. That means we are increasing our culture confidence, which will also give kind of the implication for the global south. The number three and the last one is that for China, we say the GCI, we say the a community with the shared future for the mankind, right? But China will carry out this one based on voluntary cooperation. For some countries or some civilizations prefer to make a cooperation with China, China will welcome. Or someone say, no, I don't want to. China will say, okay, just let it be. Someone say, I will later come to cooperation with you. China will also respect their choice. That's my point. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Professor. I think this also came out quite strongly earlier. You know, the whole idea that you know, at times I think when we discuss China-Africa relations, at times you have questions posed whether African countries will try to follow, you know, the Chinese model or the Chinese governance system. And I think constantly what some of us are saying is that it's not so much that African countries will try to copy what China is doing. But I think what is important is just to appreciate that they forge their governance systems and their models on the basis of an understanding of their own society. So
Yes.
if you have ownership for your systems, you know, this is what is a key lesson. And I think, some of those points, you make them quite well. So it's not about copying another model. It's
Of course,
about
of course.
having a better
Yes.
understanding of yourself in
Uh-huh.
order to forge governance systems relevant for your own society. So
Yes.
thank you very much for that, Professor. Coming up next, we'll ask Professor Kwezi Pra from the Department of History, University of South Africa. Your initial reflections. I mean, you've done a lot of work, not just in terms of South Africa and Africa, but you've spent considerable amount of time also in China. You have that vantage point of actually understanding better Chinese culture, but also Chinese governance systems, Chinese society, and of course you are very much rooted on the African continent. So interested to hear some of your insights.
Thank you very much, Chair, and warm greetings to everyone. All protocol observed for our diplomatic corps, and thank you for your insightful comments on a very difficult topic, colleagues. I'll say first and foremost, I am a citizen, and therefore my role is to speak to power. So if I do not adhere to diplomatic protocol, please excuse me. As a historian, it's difficult to appreciate the present simply because I see the pattern throughout the histories of the world. Sorry. My point being, when we're talking about civilizational dialogue, it's very exciting for someone like me because we can now address the elephant in the room. What is the elephant in the room, by the way? We live in a world which enjoys the fruits, or dare I say, the rotten fruits of a system we have created. We're at a certain stage of interaction. Some call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Others call it high capitalism. Some call it monopoly capitalism. But the point is, we are enjoying the labor of many, many years of change. The mode of production that we are enjoying or engaging in is key to a civilizational dialogue. The mode of production being the capitalist system of exchange. Is this sustainable? Is this sustainable? When we look at systems and institutions, they revolve around sustaining this particular system or mode of production. And a lot of historians to date have called into question the value of the system that we are so-called enjoying. So over some time, I've been paying close attention to how this mode of production serves itself and serves those who enjoy its benefits. There's a term called imperialism. I think we're all familiar with that. That has a certain role to play in how societies engage each other. And we see it playing out quite viscerally on TV when one army goes into another person's backyard and takes the president and calls him a criminal. We see children being held hostage and killed in the name of cleansing one's culture. So there is a form of imperialism that is enjoying space, enjoying freedom in a world which does not allow that sort of activity or agree with that sort of activity. So we need to consider, one, the mode of production we're in. capitalism? At what stage has it reached to the point that it is not sustainable? And if we do address that question, we begin to think, what happens after such a system fails or falls? The institutions that support this mode of production are also important to investigate. Are banks the way forward? Are insurance companies the way forward? These are questions we need to ask ourselves as practitioners or people who service these industries and spaces. The second point that I'd like you all to consider is the people's voice. I started off by saying I'm a citizen of the state. And so I speak to power or speak truth to power. That's my role as a historian and as a citizen, a concerned citizen. But if my voice is taken away in the name of advancement or development, then what is the purpose of my existence? What is the purpose or value of my existence? If the people do not have a voice, they do not have a say in development. Africa does not have a voice, so to speak, in the global food chain or the global value chain, so to speak. We need to address that. The ambassador brought up a very important point, but it was hushed. The large language models that are being developed are not taking into account African languages. And African languages carry world history, so to speak. They carry the stories of origin. They carry the stories of family. They carry the stories of organized society. If we negate African languages, we negate our history as human beings. Full stop. What is happening to the people's voice? The third point I'd like you all to consider is the principle of ownership versus the principle of custodianship. Capitalism has an end as an end point, the end point being profit. Whatever margin, whatever space, whatever form of labor, the end result is profit for whoever engages in exchange. Now, if we all understand colonialism to have entrenched a certain space for markets to exist, then we know the global south has served one purpose: to service the metropolis. And if we service the metropolis, we are always bound to being labor that is subservient to this metropolis. This is a very simple fact that was clearly announced and enunciated by many theorists. So where do we understand our role as owners or custodians of our living environment? I think this is the most important set of points that we need to consider if we are to engage in any productive conversation about civilizations. As my esteemed colleagues have mentioned, African society, Asian society are literally the progenitors of human societies at large. And so to negate our voices in this conversation would be self-destructive. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you for those reflections. And I think essentially, if we are to have a dialogue among civilizations, perhaps one of the things that it prompts us to do is to really ask ourselves, who are we? What voice are we contributing, to this dialogue, amongst civilizations? And it forces us, not necessarily, it's a sort of two-pronged way. Yes, on the one side, you have to learn about others, right? But on the other side, you have to go inward and learn more about who we are and what do we contribute as a continent in this dialogue amongst civilizations, so that we are not necessarily replicating a challenge that we have encountered, if that of being largely consumers rather than producers, whether it's knowledge, whether it's products, and in other areas. So I think this really becomes important, and if one of the positives that could come out in this dialogue among civilizations is greater self-awareness. I mean, the example you mentioned around language, it's a reality, is that if all these models are produced and these innovations are made, and if all this data is extracted from the African continent, however, it is not the input is not actually based on our own languages, then that perpetuates a challenging situation which we're already encountering, which is being on the periphery. And I don't think that is what we are trying to do. I don't think that is where we are trying to get to as a continent. So yes, reflect, but then action also has to come out of that reflection. Our next panelist colleague is someone who's worked very closely on Africa, who's worked very closely also on South Africa, and I think is in a position to also reflect on the Global Civilization Initiative and to think of it also in terms of its relevance for Africa and the Global South. I'd like to give the floor to Professor Liu Haifang.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Dr. Filani?
Perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And then thank you to IGD, those good friends for a long time, Sanusha and Chrissy. I haven't seen you for a while. I just was given announcement yesterday this time. So it's quite a short notice for me to prepare. And then just reflect what have been said by the keynote, and then also to echo what colleagues, previous colleagues have said about. I want to bring my own reflections a little bit, and then hopefully I could finish within time. And I want to bring mostly since Bandung up to now, today's main idea, Global Civilization Initiative as the theme, and then to reflect what happened as IR study scholars. And sorry, let me check. I want to start from former President Nelson Mandela, who actually an honorable doctor of our university. He is one of those very, very few honorable doctor we have given to foreigners. Foreign guests like his levels as a president or the head of the other countries. And but he, as one our former president of our university, ever said he is South African, but he's also of the world, and he's also of our Peking universities. These are some of those pictures. When 1992, he firstly came to visit before he became the president yet. And then 1999, he already announced he will leave. He would leave his position soon, but as the final national visit, he come to his university, Peking U, do a remarks. So I was one of those students back then, and then witness the whole changes and then what happened since then as a scholar doing African study in very fortunate way. And then I want to move to 2024 when the current President Ramaphosa, he visited China and then attended the FOCAC summit. And then he quoted actually what Mandela talked about in Peking U 1999. He said, whatever there is a need, opportunity rise. And then he emphasized this kind of a common humanity. And then Ramaphosa quoted and then saying this is the reason for us to, under the banner of a FOCAC, to getting together again, and he emphasized sort of a shared prosperity as the common desire, while also recognize can you see that now? Oh. But maybe from my side, it suggests that your broadband is rather weak, and maybe I can switch off my camera so that probably we could see it the screen clearer. Let's Okay. Yeah, thank you. Is that okay now? If you can you see the screen now? It's moving? Oh, that's a bit strange, but I will quickly just use my voice and then to avoid complications. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm saying about what Ramaphosa quoted from Mandela, and then emphasizing the shared prosperity, and then also I think you have sent some messages to me. Okay. Yeah. And then he emphasizing on one hand to share prosperity, but on the other hand about also recognize each individual developmental aspirations. For me, this is the key for the global civilization initiatives. And then I think the former leaders, they have already followed this type of a principle. And then my colleagues, Professor Xue, already elaborate from Chinese point of view very clearly. So I won't repeat, but I want to say, I rather think this has been the case from the beginning. And then historically, obviously, we all know how China, I mean, together with other Asian, as Sanusha just mentioned, other part of Asian has lots of deep connections. Yet, this not has been very much recognized, and then we often forgot, and then we still felt it was due to 15th century's Western expansion to the world that we have been reconnected, and then that part of history tend to be forgotten. And then I actually, in my PowerPoint, I quoted the most recent book by a Yale professor, Professor Hansen. In her book, she mentioned how she thinks since 1,000 years, globalization has formalized, which she thinks that's really just due to the Asian and the Africans connectivities. And this is already the same pattern of globalization, what we have seen today, where people actually produce goods for the remote distance people, and then also every average people affected by this type of trades. And then the Europeans simply since 16th century came to take the position, to take the advantages, and then they harness the opportunity, becoming the beneficiary of this older Afro-Asian connectivities. And then with that, I also want to use another book which made by the Holland professors from University of Amsterdam, and then he has his book about Asian African development divergency. This already becoming a kind of a common puzzle. So many people asked if historically there were very equal relationship and lots of connectivities. Why since last century, mid of last century, Afro-Asia not share this same destiny, and then African become lagging behind, especially when China arrives so much into a global order. But what I want to ask to the question, I appreciate what he contributed in terms of a methodologically compare Afro-Asian since mid of last century after independence. But still, I think what haven't been done yet in sophisticated way is about to understand the common destiny. And then for my students in our school, in our class, very often, for instance, people knows the current New York mayor, Zoran, instead of his father, the famous scholar Muhammad Mamdani, this great professor. And then it has to, because of Zoran, his new position being such a celebrity, and then the father's name was shown to Chinese students, and then those others study in the campus. So for me, this is a really kind of evidence to show the connectivities historically and then contemporary Afro-Asian histories haven't been fully written, and then especially since the two continents pursue the independence, those movements, those connectivity, those solidarity things haven't been really conveyed to the younger generation. Therefore, they have such a vacuum in their mind about the historical connectivity, let alone the shared destiny. And then if we started from a Bandung conference when the two continents started to getting together, and then quoting a famous writer from Ghana, her writing about how Bandung is really the first step of a broken soul of humankind to regather together. And then this kind of a moment shared how the two continents has been trying a lot to enhance the culture link in a kind of a equal footing. And then thereafter, intellectual exchanges, mutual inspirations have been constantly a kind of common things. And then even now we know Afro-Asian writers conference still have some strong legacies. And in our university, for instance, we also have professors started exactly since 1958, the second year of Ghana got independent. The African systematic teaching and researching from African history up till the contemporary African things. So this is what I think those legacies, and then the huge importance of recognitions of each other, and then from the beginning, the foundations of this Afro-Asian solidarity has been so important for both sides. At least we could say for China's foreign policy, and then this is definitely a paved foundation for its foreign policy. And then if we come to the current stages, if I could also bring another South African president, President Thabo Mbeki, into the picture in 2006, while he attended the FOCAC summit, the very first FOCAC summit in Beijing, and then afterward he wrote. He made a talk among ANC members, and then with the title "Heavenly Gate," sorry, Heavenly Gate in Beijing, Hope is Born. That's what he used as the title. And then in his talk, he really emphasized how the two sides started the relationship from this heroic struggle against subjections, which also mentioned by Professor Kwesi, and then about how this common identity pursuing freedom and liberation, and also upholding human dignity. And in his words, he said, this is the two sides strive for currently strive for economic development and national rejuvenation. The progress and the development of China, Africa are already a major contribution to the advancement of human civilizations. So if to go further, he said this kind of regard each other as a fellow freedom fighters. It's exactly the achievement, the link, the connectivities between the two together. And then he also emphasized, if we could say, how international solidarity is something to respond those suspicions in the environment already about China, why already still have a relatively low per capita GDP, already provide assistance and support to African people and else. And he said, this is a kind of a common things with our own country. South African also has that kind of a problem, or to honor our principled commitment to the practice of international solidarity, and also to the rest of our continent and then other African diaspora. We were also very much challenged, criticized, but this kind of shared international solidarity to is still the common things for South Africa and China. So I want to go to too detail, but what I want to end is really bring what Thabo Mbeki brought in his talk. He said he can say how China serves for human solidarity, and then instead of aims to the top, and then he trusts this is because China still continuing have its people suffering from poverty, from underdevelopment, and then therefore it has very clear understanding about innate impulse towards human solidarity, towards brotherhood and sisterhood among the poor. So that's what he thinks bring current China and then African continent together. And then he also thinks that's the reason why he thinks from a FOCAC that he want to spread a message of a hope, because globalization in a manner can finally benefit the poor of the world if to really promote more China-African to work together. And then with that, I want to reflect what Adam Smith, why the West start to expand to the world, what he says, for those, the Western, the Europeans, they committed so much crimes to those inhabitant of all of the different culture, and then the world suffers so much, and then the West has no impunities, and then for what they committed of the injustice. So just as what Chrissy just mentioned, they are enjoying their so-called civilizations, and then who will restore this type of justice to the African and then other people suffered from their development? And then Adam Smith said, only final. Yes, I'm finishing. I'm finishing. Thank you. I'm finishing. He said he can only expect all those small states, small people, group of people, they use the same kind of courage and then forces by inspiring mutual fair. And then finally, they can gain respect from those who already committed the injustice. So with that, I want to suggest that from the continent, if we look back from Bandung up to now, between the Asian and then African countries, mutual aspirations has constantly been the main theme of the two continents. And therefore, today, why the world lack of so much of international solidarity, and then also, as we have discussed, Africans suffered so much while we are facing a post-aid era. So what can solve the problem? I think still power of aspiration from each other, and also this power of solidarity also still play important role, while we are seeing the other side of the world are still committed to supremacy or other, old way of doing things. Yeah, I stop here. Thank you for allowing me finish.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think I think colleagues, that concludes our opening remarks in the panel. What I would like to do is open it up. I know that we might have one colleague online who has a question, who had already put up a question even just before the panel even started. But what I would like to do is maybe identify just a few hands. I can already see one at the back and at the front, and okay, let me do this. Let me just do a bit of walking and stretch my legs. If colleagues can introduce themselves briefly, and then make your comment, and then or question.
Thank you very much, Prof. My name is Dr. Zukusam Kolomba. I'm from the Public Service Commission. And my question to any of the panel members is that, how do you ensure that the trade relationship or the relationship between Africa and China is not an extractive one as typical of colonial imperialistic types of trade relationships? Why do we do it differently as Africa to make sure that there is no second scramble for Africa's resources and that Africans benefit from the resource niche that they have in terms of fueling the next successive phases and revolutions of industrialization? Thank you very much.
Excellent. Since I'm here, let me come to you, Ashraf.
Ashraf, IGD. Heartfelt thanks to the presenters. On the civilizational dialoguing, there has been this new document released by the Pope Leo, in his kind of major encyclical. The research from the Vatican kind of diagnosed a lot of the problems that we face today, especially the relationship between technology, humanity, and governance. And in reading a lot of articles on the Pope's encyclical, especially relating to AI, and then the initiatives from the BRICS or global governance and development initiatives. There seem to be some synergies, especially on the big issues of global tech, the need to subordinate this technology to regulation, to ethics, the challenges of AI in climate change and sustainability, and of course the concentration of the AI technologies in just a few firms. So my question then would be, how can this broader global civilization or global governance dialogues kind of segue into what the Pope is saying, which I think there's a lot of cross-pollination, and how does that feed into the broader UN process, i.e. the global compacts and the UN Pact for the Future? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll make my way up here.
Good morning. My name is Tebe Morake from Vincent Shabalala Education Trust. I think for me, it's just a broader question around this concept of Africa. I think South Africa is going through its own debates also about this clash of definitions about what it doesn't mean to be a Pan-Africanist. And I think within this environment, how do you kind of have relations if the concept of Africa itself is under such interesting debates? Because the continent is having its own dialogue about what it means to be one, and how do these relations develop within the context where Africa is having its own debates around what it means to be a Pan-Africanist.
And here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amara Isaac, and I am from the ISP, and I'm the head of research at the ISP. I guess my question centers around knowledge sharing within the African context and China. I think it's known, quote unquote, that China is a country of engineers, and that is what has fostered its industrialization. So I just wanted to know, in terms of education sharing, in what way can the fostering of knowledge sharing somewhat grow, quote unquote, Africa and Africa's industrialization in the near future?
Thank you. And I'll take the last one over here.
Thank you so much. My name is Christabel Piri from the African Center for Governance. I think my question is directed to Professor Kwesi, specifically around how we celebrate Africa's history and civilization. I think the context is, how do we bring that history in our present and appreciate with our young people and the youth generation? If we go back to ancient Mali and the knowledge that was there, Africa having the first university and all those aspects, how do we bring that rich history? Then we talk about Egypt and all the knowledge that came from there and was spread into different continents. There's a lot that we could celebrate in terms of Africa's civilization, which could have been disrupted with activities such as the slave trade and all those aspects. How do we bring back that, and really amplify it so that the young people appreciate where we're coming from, and it becomes a motivation to say that there's a lot in the continent that we can give to the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe we start with you, Professor Kwesi. Just starting with that question, and then we can make our way around the panel. Also, panelists, you've heard a number of questions, so feel free to just reflect on those questions that you wish to reflect on.
Yeah. Thank you, Christabel, for that fantastic question. It's a no-brainer. I say that because the technology available and the work done equates to something having to move forward. We have to have an output. There was a massive project regarding the harmonization of African languages that took 2 decades. of which it produced dictionaries of our languages, shows the relationship between our languages, and therefore showed the relationship between our cultures. So the next step or evolution of that would be to digitize the dictionaries and then input or put them into platforms that would popularize and distribute language in that sense. That would be the stepping stone to mainstreaming information about change or developmental markers like industry, manufacturing, politics, etc. The problem we are facing as a department in history is translating terms like capitalism, translating terms like mode of production, translating terms like socialism into our languages so that our people can grapple with those concepts and use their languages to reinterpret them and perhaps even come up with a new understanding or version of how we exchange and produce, create value. I think this is the most important thing we need to do. But the work is done. It's just a matter of whether these corporations see value, profit in digitizing African languages. It's bizarre that we are in the 21st century and this hasn't happened. I hope I've answered your question. I have answers to the others, but I'll allow my colleagues to. No.
I mean, I think to kind of get a cross section of issues that have come up with the question around the trade, the issue around the AI governance, and how this feeds into UN context and PACs, and of course the issue around knowledge sharing. I think it's really a bigger question around how we define and how we conceptualize the issues around civilization, and what do we front load in the conceptualization of civilization? Are we front loading how we bring that knowledge into what Prof said around the digitization? And if I remember correctly, Prof's father was a spearheaded academic who started this thing around creating that knowledge production of African history, African knowledge, African civilization. And I think sometimes we tend to front load it very much along a linear way around how do we deal with the trade deficit versus the equivalency of trade between China and South Africa, or Africa in a sense. How do we bring in the new technologies, AI, and what the Pope has been writing about into the context of the UN? I think my starting point is that as we have new innovation taking place, and we're trying to then use this as a kind of compact to include everything in there, we have to be very careful in not trying to front load things that we not necessarily have conceptualized in a much more realistic way. On the AI stuff and this idea of technology and the impact, etc., links back to the trade issues. You talk about critical minerals, you talk about the issue around not another scramble for Africa, but it's happening in a digitized way. It's happening with data centers. It's happening with who owns our knowledge. It's happening with who controls our data. It's happening with where our data is stored and who has access to it. And it comes back to the ownership question. So if we're talking about the AI and what the Pope said and the UN Compact and whatever, I think it starts from within the African context of how do you start having those debates. And it links back to the point about where's this conceptualization of Africa in the context of these debates as well? The question of Pan-Africanism, does it mean unity? What does it mean? How does it link up with Agenda 2063 as an aspiration, if we add it as one of the A's to the ambassador's 3 A's? But we can also add ambivalence to this whole debate. So we can have that as part of that discussion. And I think the knowledge that we're talking about is we have to start recognizing that Africa has very, very important knowledge. It has very important architecture. It has very important scientists and engineers who have made contributions. So we're not necessarily still talking about it in terms of what we can borrow and what we can learn from others. We've made those innovations. We're just not recognizing it, and we're not owning it in that way. Last point I want to make is I think the question for me around the globalization, civilizational dynamic is, what are we trying to achieve with the civilization debate? What are we trying to achieve with the civilization discourse and the civilization dialogue? Are we trying to create a civilizational order? And if that's what we're trying to do, then I think Gramsci's quote of the old is dying and the new is yet to be born is we're not sitting in the morbidity of consequences, as he puts out. There's another part to the quote that rarely gets referenced, and that is the rise of monsters. And we are in a monstrous architecture. And I think that is what we have to ask ourselves is, if the type of order we want is one that is equivalent in terms of equity of trade, in terms of knowledge production, mode of production, sharing of how we do our development. Are we thinking civilization is the new development compact for the world? Is it a new form of development framework? Because then, of course, we're getting into very, very interesting territory. So how do we move away from that? And the final point I think we have to be very careful of is we don't want to consume civilization. We want to be able to create the civilization that was there, but to take it forward in a much more stronger way, to have recognition. But I think when you start linking it with capitalism and the mode of production, as Kwesi has said, I think then you start entering into the dangerous territory of the murky world of capitalism. Because then you're not just consuming products, you are consuming civilization.
No, excellent. Thank you very much for that. Let's come to our online colleagues. Maybe we start with you, Professor Liu Haifang. Maybe just a short reflection on some of the comments and questions that have come.
Thank you, Dr. Filani, and then thank you for the questions. I want to pick up the conversation, the questions about scholarship and then how knowledge can be shared more between China and then Africa, maybe broadly in between Asia and Africa. In this university, we have been doing lots of research jointly with our African students, but more often we learn from each other. I want to share in our center, we actually constantly working with our students organization, PWASA, Peking U African Students Association. This is the oldest one. And then back to 1998, they already existed. They emulated lots of other universities, African students to also organize themselves, to make a voice, and then also as a kind of a group to show African culture constantly, and then also demonstrate what African civilization is. So through their constant presence in our society, more often, for instance, in our annually held international culture shows, so many African countries' culture were shown and then were understood by Chinese average peoples. And then this is a very important equal relationship, and then how mutually learning. And what I want to also emphasize is among African students themselves, a kind of a new generation of a Pan-Africanism also often grow up among themselves, because as they reflect constantly, before they came, they were just one of nationals for any countries. But while they sit together with us as Africanists in our campus, we constantly using African focus as a channel to the dialogue about what are the African problems for this country and for that country, and then what Chinese experience might be able to use. And then we discussed for many times, like brain drain to brain circulation, this type of things, how China using policy initiatives to bring back majority now is, I think, 80 to 90 of Chinese overseas students can come back to work in China. So this is just a case to show how African themselves as students, they not only learn from China's experience, they also start to share lots of commonalities and then understand each other's differences. And then this, I think, as a way of how to have an equal learning of each other, and then not necessarily about the formal way to exploit, because according to Chinese policies, all African students to share the enjoying Chinese scholarship, they have to go back after they finish their degree. I this year also will see off many of my own African students of the campus go back work for their own countries. So that's what I want to share as one example about what have been done about knowledge sharing. I think people-centered is the most important things, how we can inspire younger generation and then let them to build their own countries, solve their own problems. Thank you.
Yourself, Professor Shui Li, if you want to just reflect on any of the comments and questions that have come from the floor. I think you are on mute. Okay, we still do not have any sound. Is he still on mute? Okay. Okay, if he's on mute, then I think he will alert us when he has sorted out his device. But I think, good round of reflections, colleagues. I think what I can do is if there are questions that I missed in that first round, if there are any comments that I've missed, I can still take maybe two if there's really a burning one, and then I might take a third one. But perhaps let me just come here to the back, introduce yourself, and then comment and question.
Thank you, Doc. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tato Mazu Madibo. I am co-founder and vice chairman of AMARI, African Minds for Applied Research Institute. As a macroeconomist, I think it's only fair to just kind of also look at how we look at a more financial perspective of the line of question today. I would like to just speak on rating agencies specifically. Over the past 2 weeks, it's been quite a whirlwind for South Africa. We just saw us upgraded specifically for fintech. I think it's BA2, if I'm not mistaken. Moody's just upgraded us to also to PB plus, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I can be corrected on that point. But at the same time, we've also been downgraded as an industrial economy, with now Morocco taking over. We've just broken our 15-year streak. How do we envision not just a Pan-Africanist consciousness, but also borrowing the ideas that Asia, and more specifically China, has kind of used this hybrid model consciousness on the way that they run their economy, run their financing, that we can not borrow, that's not the word here, but use as a blueprint for investment strategies for Africa. I hope that my line of question is clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, I do not see another hand. And so I think what I will ask our colleagues to do is to address that question and then also just give your final reflections before we break for lunch. I saw both of you nodding, so I expect that you would want to have something to say.
Thank you. The question about how do you find that hybrid? How do you learn from another country? I think that has been the big question that we've always asked. You know, we've been through so many different types of development modalities. We tried to look at we started off in the 80s, 90s, Washington Consensus, which was very prescriptive and very austere. You know, the austerity measures were quite impactful. Then we saw that model kind of go through its own kind of rigorous inflection points. And then you have a group of economists and people who are more political economists who argue that the gross domestic product is not really a gross domestic product, but it's a gross domestic problem. And so the model is not modeling, so you don't use it because it's an export-led growth model. And it's not necessarily, you're competing now in a much more dynamic, but a much more competitive world. So your WTO and all of that is not necessarily your friend, and you're now having policy space in the WTO because of the dysfunctionality of the adjudication mechanism, the DSU, the dispute settlement unit. And that's because of the US and the unilateral decision to make it that way. So you can take countries, the EU did this. They took Indonesia or Malaysia, one of the countries, to the WTO DSU, but there's nobody to adjudicate. So, you know, Indonesia or Malaysia continue to do their business in what the EU feels as flagrant violations of the neoliberal or the trade regime that we have, the rules of the trade regime. My answer to that question is, you got to find your own space. You can't keep talking about looking at the US or looking at China or looking at East Asia. I mean, I could even argue that the ASEAN is a good model because it keeps it quite slim and tight. And the slimness and the tightness of ASEAN means that it doesn't allow the bigger countries like China to become much more dominant and have a preponderance of power in ASEAN. But it works well. But this is the point we need to think about, is what are the structural conditions in Africa that make it conducive for Africa to find its mojo? And at the end of the day, we're having the same debates. We're going around in circles around these debates. And now we've got the ACFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So we're not sure where that's going. But there's one thing that I picked up in your comments stroke question, is that you can actually have rating agencies give you a positive upgrade of your credit. So it makes it easier for you to borrow money on the global equity and liquidity markets, because the level at which you're borrowing or you're being able to access those markets means that you are more favorable. But it doesn't do anything to inflation targeting monetary policy price stability. So while it's easy for government and government bonds and whatever to find their equity and make it easier to borrow, it doesn't deal with structural socio-economic issues in the country, because your central bank has just made inflation a 3% bandwidth. And now they've increased the interest rate, which means that inflation is going to be even more impactful on people's lives and livelihoods, because inflation has a thoroughfare impact. So I can't see that model that we're talking about from a global economic perspective. It's just not working out. We're saying it's an export-led growth model, but an export-led growth model where you have to find what your industrial capacity is. And why did Morocco become so successful? Is of where Morocco is geographically located. If you take, for example, the business model of the cage which is called culture, aggregation, geographic, and economies of scale. Look where Morocco is, and look at what industrial policy was there. We're still grappling. And it's not just in terms of South Africa. I think in many ways, you've got to think about a bigger industrial context. But is this export-led growth model still viable? And I'm not sure. And so I think when you talk about civilizational debates, you have to have the financial globalization debate in it. But I think the big challenge for Africa and for all countries that have a booming young generation is that they are not willing to be patient anymore, because they want to see the models that will start giving them improvement in their lives and livelihoods. So I'm not sure whether, when we talk about the civilization model as a dynamic, as a mode of production, as part of what you call this, an anchor, acceleration of development and adhesiveness for global governance, I'm not sure if it's taking the voice of young people, especially in the African continent, but also in terms of other countries where the younger people are not being included in that kind of discussion. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Tanusha. Let's have your final remarks, final reflections, Professor Pra.
I'll keep mine short. And the young man and lady, I think, Dr. Mkolomb, I think, asked very important questions. And Sanusha, I think, has once again done a brilliant job of dissecting the issue. As a historian, of course, I'd bring you back to the fact that our states were established for a purpose, full stop. Petro economies, cash crop economies, extractive industries, all served a purpose. The sooner our friends in power understand that, the better the chance that we can change and perhaps possibly come up with a new so-called model of productivity and valuation. She brought up an issue of valuation, colleagues. Moody's is a joke. The people who are at top of Moody's are not our friends. They are populated by people from the United States, the EU, the same states or cartels that set up the colonial regime in the first place. So we have to take ownership of the conversation. We have to then think of ourselves as custodians of the resources on which we sit and live on, you know. So that conversation about mode of production is important. We need to really think about the concept of exchange and who and what is valuable. We already have that entrenched in our languages. And so we need to not necessarily weaponize them, but we need to find practical ways to actually bring that to life. That leverage regarding the resources on which we sit, that leverage regarding the histories of our people and how we actually interact with each other diplomatically, politically, will serve humanity in ways that we cannot comprehend. We have to take ownership, colleagues, custodianship of what we have. That's pretty much all I can say in this conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I think an important point is to, you know, sometimes people might say our states are not functioning. And as a historian, you pretty much flip it around and say, you know, maybe they're functioning the way they were designed. And that's the problem, you know, so there needs to be serious rethinking around that. I see Professor Shui Lee, you are there. I think you're on time just to give your final reflections. You've heard the discussion, you've heard some of the questions. So just your final closing statement before we close the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Because I didn't find the key to turn on the speaker. So I would like to have a few points to respond. First of all, I will say, just like the moderator say, no country can copy China's experience. It just can get some reference. And according to my experience, that I visit a lot of countries from all of the continents, it seems to me that there is no one country can get rich or to be the developed country and avoid pollution. Meanwhile, as well as with the democracy, there is a gap between the elite and the rest. That's the fact. So for the more than 90% of the South African people, most important things is how to get the salary for their food and clothes rather than the free speech. That's one. And the second one, I would say, how to solve the problem. I mean, the trade deficit between China and Africa. Of course, the South Africa. South Africa used to be the center of the manufacturing in the, not only in the African, even in the worldwide. But nowadays, according to my observation during I was in South Africa, South Africa now import a lot of things from China, including the grocery, light industry, manufacturing industry. That means if South Africa want to make the balance of the trade between China and South Africa, you have to develop your own industry, including light industry and manufacturing industry. How? Just now, Professor Liu said we have a lot of the cooperation between scholars. I think it's another thing is South African need to send more students to China to do business as well as the run machine. In China, every year we grow up millions of the engineers. That's the largest number in the world. That's why China became the center of the manufacturing in the world. That's the key. Okay. So the last one, I will say that for the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, for the Chinese foreign policy, also for the this kind of the speech by the President Xi, we call it the what? 人类命运共同体. All of you know that, right? A community of the shared future for mankind. The China pay much more attention to the developing country rather than developed country. Among the developing country, surrounding country, and African continent are irreplaceable for China. The room between China and the African to cooperation is very huge, much larger than the room between China and Europe and China and the USA. So what we can do, just we try to more exchange, more connection, and also more learn each other. Not only South Africa learn from China, China also can learn a lot from the South Africa. Thank you.
That when African students go to China, I was speaking to a professor recently who's at the business school, I think at Peking University. Well, he gave me a good example of how some African students have gone to China, like to Peking University, and some of his best students were successful not just academically, but were successful because while they were in China, they were identifying business opportunities. So for instance, there's an example he gave of a student who graduated, went back to their country and actually founded a drone business. basically delivering, different products in their country, medical equipment and things like that, using drones. But by the time they were in China, they had basically looked at the supply lines, they had looked at, the various cost structures, and they were able to go back and actually establish, having made all the networks in China. So important to come out, yes, with the degree, but also to look beyond that for opportunities. Professor Liu Haifang, you have the last word, your concluding remarks before we break for today.
Thank you, Dr. Filani. I thought I wouldn't have a chance because I seemingly took more time during my presentation. But if I can conclude, I want to emphasize again the several words I used: power of aspiration, and then power of solidarity, and then probably add another one: power of confidence. We suffered too much historically, as Kwesi Pra already mentioned so many times, and then how to get out the trap. And then the confidence is so important. I think if China could make a success, if Morocco can be relatively successful, and then why not other countries from African continent? So this shared starting point, and then the current stages in need for African continent really beg for more mutual learning and the mutual dialogue. This, I think, is the meaning for global civilization initiative, more dialogue. Thank you.
Colleagues, I really want to just thank all of you for taking time, from your schedules to participate in this dialogue today, titled China's Global Civilization Initiative in a Changing Geopolitical Landscape: What Relevance for Africa and the Global South. I think we've definitely left with a lot of food for thought. Definitely want to, again, just say thank you to the collaboration, that enables us to put some of these engagements together. And I think what has been important is not just a reflection on China's global civilization initiative, but to have a really concrete reflection about what Africa is bringing on the table when it comes to a dialogue of civilizations. And for Africa to have a better understanding that it is not just a consumer when it comes to a dialogue of civilizations, but that it can actively contribute to this dialogue and bring something, quite substantive to the table. And I think, colleagues, what we'll be doing is obviously we will disseminate the recording of this particular dialogue. But beyond that, we will also be releasing a short report looking at the dialogue of civilizations as a concept, but also as a program, and looking where Africa essentially locates itself within that. And again, that will be distributed further. I'd like to thank the participants, the panelists, both based here in South Africa and also based in China. I'd like to thank the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Certainly want to thank the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Pretoria for participating and honoring this particular seminar. And we started by saying, I would like to have you all out of here by 12:30, and I can gladly report that we will all be out of here by 12:30. But on your way out, colleagues, please, if you don't have already a, what you call this, like a lunch voucher, yeah? If you don't have it already, please go past that table at the back and collect a lunch voucher. Number two, if you are driving, please do not pay for parking. Please go to reception, get your ticket stamped, because I think your prices have been accumulating since the morning. So with that, colleagues, I just want to say thank you very much. Please give yourselves a final round of applause, and then let's have lunch.